Welcome to Old Man Blerd. Hi, I'm John, and along with my friend Terrence, we make up a pair of lifelong geeks who happen to be black, over 50, but are certainly nerds first and foremost. The Alpha Geek and the Omega Freak. And we welcome everyone. And by everyone, we mean nerds, blerds, and bleaks, cosplayers and role players, geeks and freaks, Marvel zombies and distinguished competitors, Trekkies, Star Warriors, Batmaniacs, and Spider fans, Warhams, Whovians, AFOLs, adult fans of Legos, Tolkienites, Weeaboos, Supernatural hunters and otakus, Ava geeks, Bro stars and Sistars, Pokemon trainers, Potterheads, Bronies, Whovians, Browncoats, and Scoobies, and all nerd properties in between. Because we are over 50, we've seen a thing or two, and have experience, long experience, with a lot of these properties. So thank you for listening to Old Man Blerd.
There we go. There we go. It disappeared.
Yay! You're here.
Yes, I know. I'm trapped.
We're here with your rapt attention. Welcome everybody to Old Man Blerd. And this is a special new Doctor Who review coming right at you. So I think we've all been caught up. Remember the new Zoo review? That dates us completely.
Oh, come on. Don't you remember Henrietta Hippo?
And what was the owl's name?
I forgot what his name was.
Freddy the Frog. I remember Freddy the Frog. He was the young kid one. And then Henrietta Hippo, she was sort of a Southern Belle type thing. And then there was something the owl.
Right. And we were mean as kids because we used that against the girls that are overweight.
Yikes. We probably did. It was a little bit of fat shaming.
Times
certainly. And so have we. So this is our official Doctor Who review of something that I'm assuming some blerds, some black nerds, black geeks, bleaks and blerds have been waiting for. I was, I think, okay either way. I didn't need the Doctor to be a different shade, but it's kind of neat that he is. And now we have the 15th Doctor, played by Scottish, I think he's Scottish Rwandan actor. It's pronounced Ncuti Gatwa. So, and he is our official 15th Doctor. And he is, just a quick summary of the previous specials, because there was 3 specials. He premiered in the last of the 3rd special, The Giggle, and then had his official Christmas episode with the Church on Ruby Road, which introduces his newest companion, Ruby Sunday, who I believe is played by Millie Gibson is her name. And just a quick summary of the previous specials. We had the 14th Doctor, which is when the 13th Doctor regenerated, it ended up being the face of the 10th Doctor, played by David Tennant, and is the 14th Doctor. And then the 14th Doctor reunites with Donna Noble and her family in the Star Beast. That was special number 1. I guess Russell T Davies is back as, I guess, the showrunner. And they have some adventures. I won't spoil too much. You should check it out. And I will be spoiling some things in the Christmas episode and The Giggle. So just warnings, spoilers, as River Song says. Then there was The Wild Blue Yonder, where they meet briefly a Sir Isaac Newton, played by an East Indian actor. Some people had an issue with that. I I felt like it was fine, but it was cute, but I think that I see why people have a problem with historical figures changing the race. And that was the Wild Blue Yonder. And then they had some more adventures there. That was a great episode. Won't spoil it for you. I think you should see it. And then there they go on to the Giggle, and this is where Neil Patrick Harris plays the toy maker. And now spoilers will begin because there is a regeneration that is called a bi-generation, so that the 14th Doctor, played by David Tennant, and the 15th Doctor, played by Ncuti Gatwa, exist simultaneously. So then we move on to his first official Christmas adventure, which they haven't done since, I guess, 2005. And that was the church on Ruby Road. So now, for those of you that love us but don't want to have any spoilers, you should probably check it out, those episodes out first. And now we are going to get spoiler heavy. So first off, Terrence, what did you think of Ncuti Gatwa just as a doctor? Did you feel like he was well within that lineage of doctors and his zaniness and intelligence, or what'd you think?
I think he is interesting in a doctor that he is almost like Batman as far as he had like 2 or 3 gadgets rather than just a standard sonic screwdriver.
Which I'm not sure
Including,
I like the sonic screwdriver. It looks less screwdriver and more remote control-y.
yes, it does. But maybe that's what they wanted to show, the new change with the bio generation, because we have the other doctor walking around with the sonic screwdriver still. And he
Sure.
still leaves when he feels like it.
Yes. Yes. What was the other? I don't remember the other gadget that he had.
Gloves.
Oh, that's right. The gloves. And I dug the gloves because, I feel like anytime they introduce real physics to the Doctor Who series or any sci-fi series, just even a little bit, then it's because, you can suspend disbelief only so much. And at a certain point, it's like, oh, you're holding your whole body weight and someone else on a ladder that's, swinging, up, roughly, a few hundred meters in the sky. Maybe not necessarily possible unless you got crazy core strength.
Well, I mean, you also got to think about it. If anyone could to a degree, is him because he is built more like a ballet dancer.
Sure, sure. So he had new gadgets. What'd you think of his style? Because they give him a bit of panache. They give him a bit of style, I think. We're gonna see more of it because I've seen pictures of him looking pretty styly. What did you think of that?
As long as the rainbow, as the doctor with always having the rainbow or question marks, hey, I don't care.
Yeah, he was funky,
He was
fresh,
only the
dressed to
first
impress.
three. Yeah, only the first 3 really didn't have that.
Yeah, oh no, they were just sort of, I'm an old man.
Right.
I'm
Baker
an old
broke the loot with the scarf, and it went from there.
Yeah, and I didn't think Eccleston was particularly stylish, although I guess the leather jacket was sort of styly,
Well,
kind
they
of.
actually said that Nicholson is the one that actually made it so the Doctor could exist because he was the first one that, for lack of a better term, made him down to earth as far as UK went.
Sure. I mean, he is absolutely important because he was, the relaunch, the official relaunch. I think that, well, I guess yeah, because he was the 9th Doctor and that was the sort of the relaunch. And he was great, but in terms of style, I feel like then when you get to Tennant, it's like, okay, you got the trench coat with the Chuck Taylors, the white Chuck Taylors. Then you got Matt Smith with the bow tie and the fez and the sort of they weren't quite Doc Martin boots, but they were kind of coolish boots in a way, right?
Mhm.
I don't think that uh Capaldi was super styly, but he kind of was. He had the sunglasses and all that sort of thing as the
The
Sonic. It
dark.
was like Sonic's sunglasses as opposed to a screwdriver for a bit there.
Well, yeah, and also he was doing the midlife crisis. Well,
Oh, you're breaking up a little bit. I'm sorry. What'd you say?
He was doing the midlife crisis doctor, if you will.
Yes, he was the midlife crisis Doctor Who. I have a soft spot for him because I think I'm at midlife. Well, I know I'm at midlife, but I think I relate to being curmudgeonly a little more than styly and on a scooter like Matt Smith.
Oh
With
yeah, oh yes,
yeah,
I've gotten to that stage. Get off my lawn.
yes, he was the get off my lawn doctor. But and then after that, I think they didn't have a real good style for the 13th Doctor so much. She had an interesting sonic screwdriver. Um Whitaker had and she was zany. Kind of I guess it was
With
like
the
a rain.
suspenders.
Yeah, there was the suspenders with the rainbow t-shirt. Um, I don't feel like it was as iconic as Matt Smith's Doctor or Tennant's Doctor. But it's going to be interesting with Ncuti Gatwa whether or not they kind of have sort of the black exploitation brown leather jacket. He's a little more Shaft than he is than Doctor
True,
Who.
true.
Which is fine. I think give him some style. I think yeah, I thought it was great. It didn't feel like an interruption to what a doctor is like, which is a bit of a know-it-all, a bit zany, um, genuinely cares about humanity in a really good way. So good stuff. So I'm gonna go through a little bit of, what happens in that episode, um, and how they introduce Ruby Sunday. And what'd you think of Ruby Sunday? Just briefly, first blush, what's your hit on Ruby Sunday, played
I think
by
she's the standard Russell type of companion,
Oh, you
which
think
is
so?
it's down to earth like the first Ruby, or was it Rose? Rose?
Rose, yeah, she was down to
Chris-
earth. Yeah, I think so. And this is
and they
Go
don't
ahead.
want you to outreach. And I mean, the idea of her family being interracial was interesting. That was cool.
Yeah, so like that she's adopted, you know, by Carla, I believe. Um
Mhm.
and
And her mother.
her grandmother, Cherry, who I thought had some great lines in trying to get just a simple cup of tea and asking for it during the entire adventure. Um yeah, and she was the one child that she fostered that she decided to keep. In the context of the story, um, you know, she's having all of these accidents happen similar to gremlins. They're goblins that are causing these sort of accidents that, I wasn't really clear as to why they were causing the accidents because I didn't understand why they wanted to kill her because their whole thing was eating babies. So I didn't
She's the one that
understand.
got away. That's it in
Yeah,
a nutshell. She's the one that
yeah,
got away.
she's the one that, and they were mad about that, and that,
Yeah.
but and the 15th Doctor spots it right away that, oh, okay, something's unusual about Ruby, and it turns out, and this is probably going to be the deep mystery, is who is it that uh dropped her off. Long story short, Ruby uh was uh a baby that was placed outside of a church on Ruby Road on Christmas Eve. Was it, I
Mm.
believe, Christmas Eve?
Yes, it was. It was Christmas Eve.
And it seems like it's a woman that dropped her off. So that's going to be, I think that may be something interesting. I had some master vibes, which, we've talked before. I would love one of the companions to end up being the master and then revealed at the end of the season. But, one can wish. But I definitely felt like, okay, this is a little strangely mysterious. And, over the course of the episode, um they sort of do a It's a Wonderful Life on Ruby and make it so that she ends up getting kidnapped instead of her foster sibling Lulabelle, which is what brings the Doctor over. It's like they're trying to kidnap Lulabelle. The Doctor sort of snatches Ruby to get onto the Goblin ship, which is like an old pirate ship type style that flies in the sky. And they rescue the baby, but then it ends up happening that Ruby gets taken at her time of being dropped off, some 20 years earlier or something like that. And the doctor has to go rescue her and all of that. Dance number on the Goblin ship. What'd you think of the dance number? That's something I have not seen in a Doctor Who, I don't think. A musical number?
No. Well, no, nobody's really seen that. But, it was kind of like, okay, cool.
Yeah,
Again, it made me think of the Goblin King from Labyrinth, number one. I mean, right down
nice.
to going to get Lulabelle, because, it's the same thing. They go get the baby from the Goblin King. But in this
Yeah.
case, it wasn't going to become a goblin. It was going to be 8. So, okay, there you go.
Yeah, they really wanted to eat the baby. They had a song about how tasty babies are.
But the thing that got me also was this Doctor, he uses any pattern as a language to him, which is interesting. Because the coincidences was actually more of a language, hence magic.
Yes. And so that was an interesting thing, is that there was a few languages that were going on that showed specialized, I think, the linguistic skill and engineering skill of the Doctor, which he's always had. They've always had, doctors. He ends up seeing the language of the ropes.
Yes. To entice himself.
And how they work, similar to electrical wires. So he eventually susses that out. And he also, figures out their language is coincidence, and coincidences are how they sort of have their power to some degree. And then you see, because of that, you see the link. One of the coincidences is the link between the Doctor being sort of this orphan and not knowing his true parentage, and Ruby Sunday not knowing who her parents are, because even though she goes early on in the episode, she goes on to a television show that's sort of responsible for trying to find people's parents who have been adopted or fostered. I forgot what they call it. It's like it was a particularly British word of referring to foundling, I think.
Yes. That's what
Is
they
what it
said.
was. Yeah, it's like sort
Instead
of
the one we rip off, which is changeling.
Yeah,
which actually
right.
went again hand in hand with the goblins.
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of reoccurring motifs, and that's part of the whole episode is coincidence. And then you see like the coincidence of the 15th Doctor not knowing who his family is. And I think that we're gonna probably explore that piece, because they kind of let that sort of die, didn't they? The sort of forgotten
Well, the
child,
biggest
was it?
thing, yeah, they kind of let it go. But then again, in the giggle, that's where the toy maker basically said he made his history into a jigsaw puzzle. So that means any of them apply and don't at the same time.
If
you really think about it. Because
and
Patrick McGowan, number 8, his father was a Time Lord and his mother was human.
mm-hmm.
And then they set up here and say all of a sudden he's the Timeless Child. And then all of a sudden you hear him say he's an orphan. So it's kind of like, okay, and that goes back to him being a puzzle.
Sure. I'm sorry, I said forgotten child. It's the timeless child. And I think that's the thing when you have a property like Doctor Who, which, is very similar to how long you have superheroes, you start to have some continuity mistakes. Because somebody wants to expand the lore and maybe someone else doesn't like the expansion of the lore and changes the lore again. I'm not attached particularly. I think that it is actually much more interesting how much they sort of tied up with those first 3 specials for 2023, because they sort of tie up what happened with Donna, because Donna got the shaft sort of as a companion. I mean, all of them do. And that's kind of what the toy maker was sort of expressing during the puppet show.
Right.
He expressed in the puppet show, it's like, yeah, well, that's all right then. How many of these human beings you've played with, which, you've cut their strings, and now, you have Clara who's living the last second of her life, and the pawns basically getting got by the weeping angels, and all of those things. Every companion suffers a sort of kind of a negative fate. But I think that they were trying to address that. That's why they tried to fix the Donna thing. They tried to have the toy maker look at have the 14th Doctor look at all of the wreckage he himself has left, and also address how confusing his own history is by, like you say, making his past a jigsaw puzzle.
But what was interesting, and they made a lot of thought about it. I mean, number one, the master got his escape route when they took care of the toy maker.
Mm-hmm.
But the three things I don't like is, I mean, you're supposed to have the superpower being, and yes, he goes by the rules. But when you say you don't want him back again, he should be able to come back somehow. It just take him time. Hence, 60 years between episodes. There you go.
Sure. Well, I think what was interesting, I mean, because how many times have we seen in pop culture the mischievous trickster god who still plays by certain rules? I mean, it's like Mixelplick. Mixelplick is...
Yeah, Mixelplick. That's the main one, because Loki
Yeah.
really doesn't.
No, but Mixelplick, and I mean, Mixelplick as a character is certainly older than Doctor Who. I think Mixelplick was Golden Age, pretty sure.
Yeah, he's about 10 years older than him.
Yeah, I would think he might have been in the 50s,
Yeah, 10 years older.
but yeah, so might have been early Silver Age, but still older than the Doctor. So yeah, you have this notion of this all-powerful creature that can do anything, and that's one of the things that Tennant's character of the 14th was saying. It's like, you could be so big, why are you being so small? And there's a terrifying element to something like that, because one of the reasons why I have a problem with theism is because theism tends to be anthropocentric. Like, all human beings are, the god is just a very super powerful human being, which doesn't make sense to me, because if you were that all powerful, omniscient, and omnipotent, you would kind of be like, oh, I don't want to use these entities, these creatures, like toys. But what if you did? what if a supreme being was like a Mixelplick or a toy maker? That would be really, really terrifying.
What has happened over history in the Pantheons?
Sure.
I mean,
sure. And
from
I think
Zeus to Jupiter to, I mean, hell, Vikings, Thor. I mean, geez, Ra.
Yeah, all of them are very human, very, very human. But once you get to Judeo-Christian oriented sort of theism, it's like, no, he's not human. But it's like, but then there's plenty of ample evidence in any number of texts where it's like, ooh, that's kind of not nice. That maybe don't obliterate a whole town. Maybe I'm sure there might have been someone good in Sodom and Gomorrah, maybe. So
Well, yeah.
the notion, not to get into any type of metaphysics, but I think that there is something troubling as a human being with the notion of a supreme being that has that level of power, that's that heady. It's like, he was okay with having tossed some people over the building. Because, the Doctor is very much not that way. He's not, omnipotent by any means. He's pretty smart, but he's not omnipotent. And he cares about every human being, he doesn't even want to kill, spacefaring races. Like in the first episode, he didn't want the Meep dead. He just wanted them to get arrested, basically.
Right.
In the special number 1 for 2023. So that is troubling for us, is to have some sort of all-powerful being that's just like, nah, I'm going to be superficial and petty, and I'm going to treat you like a toy, and I'm going to just have this long-range plan based around television to make everyone think they're right. So, yeah, so I didn't catch that part. I'm glad that you illuminated that part about him saying that he made Doctor Who's own past a one that was a jigsaw, because then that sort of explains all of their discontinuity errors.
Right. And also it explains it across the board, because we don't know how many other beings there are, because even though he mentions them and it has this and that as far as he won, in the Giggle, he talks about all the times he's won. We don't know how the doctor winning had undid or changed that very fact.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I guess he can always decide not to follow his own rules. And I didn't catch until the second viewing that he had turned the master into a gold tooth. I caught that the first viewing. I did not catch it in the second viewing that the gold tooth fell out. Now, was that a woman's hand that picked it up?
Yes, and some people suspect that the neighbor in the first new episode was the one to pick it up.
Flood?
But me,
Mrs. Flood,
yes.
or whatever it was?
Yes, but me, what about a third option?
Mm-hmm.
What did the first doctor have?
What did the first doctor have?
Mm-hmm.
A cane. I know that.
He had a granddaughter.
Oh, he did, huh?
That's right. And 70 years later, 60 years later, it'd be about her age.
Huh. So that's who
That's
you think
because
maybe.
yeah, because she recognized the TARDIS. And she was so
Yes.
happy.
And she broke the fourth wall there, with doing that. I think a lot of people are really one of the biggest buzzes for the Church on Ruby Road was that character, Mrs. Flood. I know that people have made some hay about it being like there's Amy Pond, water, River Song, water, and Mrs. Flood.
Well, they also said it could be the master because of the lady's hand picking up the tooth.
Sure.
But
And the previous master, the not 13th master, but 12th master, right? Capaldi's
right.
master was a woman. But I guess by the time the toy maker got to the master, maybe it was the 13th Doctor's master, but who knows?
Great choice of words.
It's who knows, right? Yeah, it's a timey-wimey kind of thing. So, but I think that character's probably a bit more important than not. I mean, there was a part of me that felt like, oh, that's funny. The neighbor knows that there's a TARDIS.
Yeah.
But then it was like, well, wait a second. I mean,
Hold
actually,
on a second.
Okay, go ahead. All right, we are back. Had to attend to some family needs.
Yep. Since I'm always lying on the floor here, it's like, okay, I gotta get up.
So, yeah. So who really knows what? Obviously, the master's going to be important, and yeah, lots of speculation with Mrs. Flood. Not sure what that's going to be. Actually, they sort of unleashed on all of the Who fans a number of mysteries. There's the one who waits. That's a mystery.
That's the one who actually could bring back the toy maker.
Sure.
Carl from up there. They actually were scary as that.
Yeah, the toy maker was afraid of the one who waits, so who knows what that is. You're gonna, of course, see the Daleks at some point, and probably the Cybermen at some point, I'm sure. You still have the mystery of Ruby. I find it very interesting that she was left at the church by a woman, and a woman's hand, I thought, was the hand that picked up the gold tooth of the master, and you have Mrs. Flood.
Well, actually, that's another thing too. You're right. It could be she's a Time Lord. Period.
Yeah, we just don't know. So those are I think the big underlying questions typically Doctor Who has just your regular, Monster of the Week episodes, but there's always the deep story underneath that, like the crack was, uh, during the Matt Smith season, what was
Well, that
going
was
on
the
with.
great thing about Russell. That is the one good thing about him. He does do depth.
Yeah, yeah, because you can really have a Monster of the Week kind of story, but I think that the reason why Doctor Who does is well regarded, Buffy was well regarded, Supernatural was well regarded, is that even though you could have the monster or the baddie of the week kind of episode, there was always a through line of something deeper going on per season.
Right. And
And
it's one
so,
of the things that is a problem when it comes to most sci-fi or fantasy that they cater to us is
yeah,
they try to give people, lack of a better term, they try to give them their chocolate up front without giving them their meat and potatoes.
that's true. I would think, I mean, as great and as brilliant as Star Trek The Next Generation was, I don't remember them doing that much. I mean, Deep Space Nine did, but I don't remember Star Trek having a season where it was like there's just going to be this reoccurring issue that's back in the background that's going to eventually be in the foreground. Now, it's been a while since I've rewatched Next Gen, but I don't
Well,
think
most of
that.
that stuff that happened was more of a character. What I mean is, like they might mention it episode 1, and then it'll pop up episode 10.
Sure. I mean,
Like Deanna's mother is a good example. She wasn't a problem, but she was an annoyance to Picard.
sure. And then there was the Tasha Yar thing, but that still wasn't the way certain things have played in Doctor Who or Supernatural, where the whole season in Supernatural is, oh, he was in hell, or oh, the devil's looking for an avatar, or oh, something. Same with Doctor Who. It's like, oh, we're dealing with this big square prison. What is that? Who goes in that? What's it going to be? Um,
Well,
yeah,
no, you're right because that's what I liked about Superman and Lois when it was on.
they
Is
had that.
actually they had that.
Oh, good. Because I
Yeah,
think
they
that
had that.
that's kind of how comic books are, arguably, right?
The
I mean,
Yeah, because the first season they did what they wanted to hard and fast with some of the characters. But spoiler:
mhm.
Morgan Edge turns out to be Superman's half brother.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, and
And that threw people off for a lot because we did what? You got a brother? But it made sense how they explained it was Kryptonian culture, just like so many cultures of the day. They
mhm.
had arranged marriage.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so Laura did not love the guy, didn't work out, and hence the first child.
Huh. Interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting take. I don't know what I feel about that lore wise, because I kind of like him being the last son of Krypton, but that looms large in his defining characteristics as him being the last one. But they kind of changed that anyway with Supergirl, and they changed that with Power Girl. So
Right.
I
And see, in this case, it was interesting because his brother was, for lack of a better term, an ass. But
okay.
but because his father raised him harsh, you got to be tough, you got to be this, got to be that. Militaristic.
Huh.
He raised him with a hologram that was militaristic. Humans are beneath you, like you were saying.
So
And
they did
here's
an
Clark,
Omni-Man kind of thing.
right? And here's Clark, but the redeeming part of the character was that no matter what, he wanted his brother.
Huh. So he still believed in family strongly enough.
Yes.
I
And that's
do
what redeemed him in the end. And that was interesting.
I do like the ways people have played with the Superman archetype, because Omni-Man in Invincible, which is now a television show, an animated series, um Supreme was that way, Miracle Man was that way, all of those, and I think we'll save that for another episode when we get into the anti-hero, notions of the anti-hero. But I do like when they play with some of the lore of Superman a little bit. But back to Who, yeah, I think that's one of the strongest pieces of Doctor Who, is that there's the sort of, which is I think was a limitation of the Ninth Doctor, because I don't feel like they did that very much with the Ninth Doctor. Am I remembering that correctly? I don't feel like the
You're right.
Ninth. I don't feel like the Ninth Doctor had a deep story that was season long.
See, the problem that there are two doctors. My favorite, and then everybody else's favorite. My favorite's number 8. Everybody else's favorite's number 9. And both of them are good because they're the ones that kept the doctor going. That's why I say that.
Sure, they were holding water while no one was watching Doctor Who.
Exactly. And in eight's case, it was the same thing that happens all the time. They forget, as I've mentioned before, how small we are as an audience. And they
Sure.
put on the Doctor Who TV movie with number 8
Mm-hmm.
against the finale of Roseanne's series.
Oh goodness, yeah, I was going to lose there.
Yeah. And see, I mean, those are the kind of things they don't think about. And I mean, it would have done good on the Sci-Fi Channel, you know.
Well, I think one of the reasons why the reboot in 2000, what was it, 2005? I think one of
Right.
the reasons why from 9 on got to be so big is I think that international television became far more accessible. It wasn't just, oh, seeing stuff trickle in at PBS. And I think the whole nerd culture thing, particularly with sci-fi, had gotten to a place where people more had a language for sci-fi to accept it. It's kind of like, there was a point where sci-fi was just, you were marginalized. And I think right around that time with the reboot of Doctor Who was right around the time that comic books were starting to get slowly but surely, a little more mainstream, and Supernatural and all those types of shows were starting to really hit too. So it was okay that there were these properties, these sci-fi fantasy properties out. When did the Lord of the Rings, the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings
About the
happen?
same time. It happened
So
about the same time. Because it's
yeah,
the same time that King Kong came out by Peter Jackson too, which is about between 2003 and 2005. That area between the two of them.
yeah, and that was when it was kind of like alternative music. It's like there was alternative music. Wasn't called alternative music. It was just music that no one listened to but weirdos. There was goth, there was new wave, there was post punk, there was all of these things, and then Nirvana happened, and then all of a sudden everybody was listening to stuff from Seattle. They were listening to The Cure. They were listening to all these once upon a time underground acts. And so there was I remember a documentary that I think Sonic Youth put on that was called 1994 or something, the year punk broke, and it was about
Right.
their tour with Nirvana. And it was true because, I remember going to shows that were super small with a lot of those bands. And then Lollapalooza, even Lollapalooza, as big as Lollapalooza was still people. It was all of the people that you saw at those concerts. But then Lollapalooza 2 was a completely different group. It was all the people that beat up the kids that were at Lollapalooza 1 or these smaller shows. And I think that that's what happened with stuff like Doctor Who and comic books and kaiju movies and everything else, is like, oh, this is okay to like now, you
Well,
know.
yeah. To me, it's just the same as a person who has a mental difference or in a chair or something else. Is that when it's in your household or even sexuality? Years ago that was like, but in your household, you identify with.
Sure,
But when it's
it's
outside your household, what I mean? Like both of us have had that relative, me, comics, you, your music. They're like, do you like this? And they
Oh,
don't
I had the
understand.
same thing with comics too. I mean, I
Right.
remember I liked comics and fantasy and Dungeons and Dragons and video games, and all of that stuff prior to 2000 something was pretty marginalized. If you liked comic books, it's like, first of all, it was weird that you liked reading. And then you liked reading comic books. So that was,
What's our hue? Don't forget our hue. Our hue.
yes, being black, yeah, sometimes it was like, what, you like reading? You're trying to be white. Um,
You were
uh,
there.
yeah, so but I think that the Batman movie helped comic books a lot, because when that Batman Michael Keaton movie happened,
1989.
yeah, that was a big thing. That was the first bump that, oh, maybe comic books are okay. That was the first one, and that happened right around the time that Watchmen had already happened and Dark Knight Returns had happened and Alan Moore was busily doing Swamp Thing, all of that stuff, and Vertigo Comics, all that stuff was starting to happen. So it was the first wave of, oh, comic books aren't just for kids anymore, which they revisit every, I don't know, 5 or 10 years. And so that helped comic books. But even so, until about 2000, it still was pretty marginalized. But yeah, so now if you say you like Doctor Who, it's not a big deal. You say you like fantasy or Dungeons and Dragons, not a big deal. All of these things are not a big deal. And so I think that a good chunk of Who fans really came on board right at the time of the reboot, the 2005 Eccleston run.
Oh yeah, can't deny that. And also is the fact that we're in an era of multi-licensing. If you have a
Sure.
one book or one comic or whatever, there's always that group that wants a license because they want to get on the board, spread the wealth. Even though the property might only need to be one time, one thing, it might be good for what it is and not expand.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the problems we're having when they talk about superhero fatigue. What they're not going to talk about is fantasy fatigue or sci-fi fatigue or even super spy fatigue, even though they're all back with superhero fatigue. Is that if you don't appreciate it and you're just in for a partial ride, you're not going to enjoy it the same as someone who's here for ride or die.
Sure. Sure. And your I mean, I liked, I guess it was, I'm assuming it was 4. I think my first interaction with Doctor Who was 4. And that was one of the
Mm.
first big bumps and big pushes of towards the American audience, because they kind of had those on fairly frequently for on PBS. They had 4 pretty frequently. I don't think I don't know if you would know this better than I, but I feel like 4 got popular enough for them to start showing 1, 2, and 3 in the States after the fact. Is that
Oh yeah,
true?
because it was, but not for a reason you'd think, in the sense that it was because it was color. 4 was in
Oh,
color.
that's true,
Because
because that first Doctor Who was black and white though.
right, and the second was in black and white, and the third one was half and half.
Hmm.
And so when 4 was in color, as I call it, soap opera graphics, because you see some of the old soap operas, not now, because it got different
Sure.
lighting.
Like
But they,
Dark Shadows.
yeah, they had certain lighting, and Doctor Who had the same lighting on number 4.
Hmm.
Now you see it, and they have the lighting on some of the soap operas, and it's almost like film. It's not even the same lighting.
Well, but one of the beautiful things, and I think this is why I will say that a lot of properties got better over time. Like the early Star Trek, they had some science fiction. I mean, it was definitely science fiction, but they didn't, it was light on the science piece of that. It was pretty light on the
Well,
science
that's
piece of
because
that.
of what they, for lack of a better term, they had their own physics.
Sure. And I think that, so it's night and day difference in terms of the science of next gen and the original Trek. Night and day difference. I mean, we had a language of quantum mechanics. We had a language of, different forms of biology, of how different creatures like the crystalline entity and all that sort of thing could exist. Uh, and I think the same happened for comics. I mean, for a long time, Iron Man was just a guy in a flying suit. But once you got touch screens and iPhones and social media, uh, the the suit really fundamentally changed, and the writing of it changed. Um, and so I think in Doctor Who, once we started really understanding traveling through space and time, and people had read, A Brief History of Time and Stephen Hawking and other theorists, people could handle their sci-fi have a little more science. And so the writing, arguably, I think, had gotten better with some of that stuff.
Right.
So I don't know. I mean, and so I think this is a good time for those kinds of properties because it's like, oh, people kind of have a working knowledge of some elements of science. It's not like, oh, we're just gonna make stuff up. It's like, oh no, this is sort of made up, yes, but it's grounded in some science.
Well,
A
I
little.
give you that. It's just that sometimes I think a good example that you was mentioning Iron Man. For lack of a better term, you could say he was the first Rick and Morty because he was a drunk.
Sure,
He believed in science against magic. I
sure.
mean, you know.
Yeah, and well, and all of the Marvel characters were, I mean, they just didn't have any knowledge of science or theoretical science or or biology for that matter. They didn't have any notion of genetics. They kind of had a little bit because they were like, well, what about mutants? They're an evolution of humanity. They kind of had a little bit of science. But when you start getting to people who everybody has a real strong knowledge of certain scientific principles, makes the science fiction better. So that's why, a lot of these shows, Babylon 5, Star Trek Next Generation, Rick and Morty, every, the current MCU Marvel universe, they just know more, so they're able to write from a less bananas kind of place.
Oh yeah, because
Sometimes
that's like we
sometimes
were
that
saying in one
sacrifice
of the
is fun, but
yeah, that's like we were saying in one of the earlier conversations about Molecular Man, Molecule Man.
Molecule Man, yeah. Yeah,
Because when he
Molecule
first
Man,
came out, he was a joke.
yeah,
He was just a joke. And all of a sudden he is like, oh my God, he takes on Galactus
yeah,
because they realize the science. It's the same thing about Aquaman. Remember again, he was just a joke
yeah.
until he go, oh my God, he can go to the bottom. Oh my God, the depth, the pressures.
Yeah, the pressures of
Yeah.
the sea, he would have to be Superman level strength. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it says once you know these things, it becomes much more interesting. I mean, the Molecule Man, great invention at the time, but he plays a huge, important sort of part of the sort of Secret Wars type stories that have come out of Marvel in the last 20 years. Because it's like, no, this is a guy who literally's got a god level you know, ability. And what do you do with that? You know, whereas
Well, that's
before it
one of the
was
reasons why they rarely use him. That's number one, why they rarely use him. And number two, as we're going to say before, he was more of a joke.
sure. And now that people have a real working knowledge of, okay, what would that really mean? And that's what I think all superheroes have. That's one of the reasons why I think DC has suffered and Marvel has suffered less, arguably, is because they're in some ways the sort of DC characters are so godlike that it's hard to pin them to science in any kind of way. They're much more mythological. Um, but I think the one place where that one exception has been Flash. I think, and Batman, of course, because Batman, you're just like, okay, let's invent all these crazy, sort of gadgets that you would find at Sharper Image. Well, Batman already had those. And the Flash, it was like, oh no, this guy can go fast enough to change time. And that's was the end science wise for Flash. But I think Flash, the Silver Age Flash, always had a little bit of that.
He did.
They always touched on science a bit more because they even had, I think, at the back of some of those Silver Age issues, they had a science fact. I think it was like flash facts or something like that. I want to say that was
Yeah.
like, oh, this is a cool sciencey thing that we're going to put at the back of a Flash comic. And Flash was singular, I think, in that way, both with Marvel and DC of really trying to do that. But
Well, see, that's one of the things. Before they had what was it, Marvel Universe,
mhm,
and I forgot what it was called, but basically they gave the science of each person's power. It was
mhm,
interesting because it was about the same time, literally it's about the same time. It is issue, I think, 136 of X-Men.
mhm.
is when Jean Grey first comes back. And there's a
She
hologram.
comes back in 101, and then she dies
Yeah,
in 137.
I know, but she comes back as a
Dies,
hologram.
quote unquote.
As a hologram. She comes back as a hologram. Used by
Um,
Kitty Pryde. And
yeah,
then they had DC. That's Superman 314, I think. And this is when he fights the Thunder God. And both of them had the same thing that nobody ever thought about. Fans become scientists. Scientists become write letters.
sure. And then they start to modify some of those, like,
Yeah,
hey, that
because
that wouldn't really work. I mean, we can suspend our belief quite a bit, but I think arguably the average comic fan can't suspend their belief the way a kid in 1955 could. It's like, oh, okay, there's is Superman's
that's the whole
suit.
point.
Yeah, Superman's just got a super dog. So,
No, the way they
there's
explained it was the X-Men, they explained Nightcrawler's powers. That's where
Mhm.
that fan came in. And the funny thing is they actually used, of course, in Marvel Universe when they were describing Nightcrawler. And then in Superman's case, they said, well, actually, Superman only has one power. It's just how he manipulates it. That scientist. He said,
yeah.
what if he can control tachyons?
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
tachyons can strengthen up because it can go through planets and they're hard as hell. So
sure.
if he can control tachyons,
And he can control it. He can, expel it through his eyes. He can use it as strength. Yeah, I mean, they do ground these things in science much more than they used to. But back to Doctor Who, because we only have a few more minutes left for this particular Doctor Who, new Doctor Who review. Um, I like him. I think there's a joie de vivre with him. I like him. I think he's fun. I really I guess we should probably say some hopes and fears to tie this up. I hope they do not write every episode of him like in segregated America or something like that. I hope that not every episode is really revolves around him being black and Ruby being white. I hope that is not the case. I do have a fear that they could do that more often than not. It would be interesting. I guess it depends on how they handle it.
mhm.
But I do hope that they continue to make the Doctor a real humanitarian, but also other, completely other, strange and out there. And I really, really, really can't stress this enough. I hope they don't ever have him be attracted to anyone. Not in any kind of like actual action kind of way. Like saying that, that Sir Isaac Newton was attractive, fine, whatever. Actually pursuing someone romantically, I think that would be a buzzkill for me as a Doctor Who fan.
Always another regeneration.
Yeah, I guess that's true. So, what are your hope? What are your so? What are your hopes and fears for this Doctor, the 15th Doctor?
I like the way they're going with the idea of him using his intellect to combat problems, like I said, with the language of the ropes or
Can
the
you
language
hold?
of chaos.
Can you hold on 1 second? Hold on 1 sec. Sorry about that. Thank you for that other break. Now I was attending to family matters. You were saying hopes and fears that you have for the Doctor.
Yeah, I like the idea of him using his intellect to solve problems. That's what always, I mean, that harkens back to the professor from Gilligan's Island. We fans of a certain age, we want to be the problem solver. We like that. And
Yeah.
having the tools to allow him to do it, hey, great too. As far as anything else goes, just as long as it's part of the story, I don't care. Just don't take away from the story.
Yep. I think
Yeah.
I think that we're in agreement there. What did you give grade wise for the church on Ruby Road, A through F?
Oh, I give it an A. I give the whole thing an A because
Yeah,
you
I think
always get the regenerations an A.
yeah, they tend to write the first regeneration episode as strongly as possible. That's for sure. I give it an A too. I think that there was enough hints of what could happen in the future that I think would be great. And they also really show enough of his character that I think is pretty intriguing, and I think that I'm excited to see more. It's going to be at some point after maybe the season goes through, we'll have to revisit the Doctor Who world for what our overall impressions of his season was, because they could stick the landing or they could really really drop the ball, and it's too early doors to tell. I do like the companion. She has enough of a little bit of Rose, a little bit of Clara, a little bit of maybe a little bit of
Sarah.
Donna, yeah, and a little bit of Sarah Jane. Yeah, I think she's solidly a good companion. It'll be interesting to see. They're not having her be sort of the damsel in distress, which I think, thank heaven, that's kind of a trope of the past at this point.
Well, most of them really weren't. They really
That's
weren't.
true.
It's just that some of them were just a little more strong-willed, almost like the man in the room, Leela.
Sure,
But
sure. I think, well, Sarah Jane, I mean, it was interesting that they made her, I believe she was a reporter, right? If I recall
right,
correctly. Yeah, so
right.
they were going for that Lois Lane kind of archetype. So she was inquisitive and independent and looking to solve things herself, which I think, the Doctor helped out. It'll be interesting to see how they shape Ruby Sunday. What kind of companion she'll be. I hope they keep it platonic, frankly. I was not a fan of the companions that swooned over the Doctor. I know it would be kind of what you would do if you were riding in this time and space machine and hanging out and having your life saved over and over again. It would be hard not to feel some romantic feelings. But I do think it is a little cliche. So
Well,
that's
I do and don't agree, because that's one of the things I liked about 8. But there
Mhm,
were a couple things they did in 8. Like, for instance, he was at a vulnerable moment a couple of times.
mhm,
And the companion was his doctor, his
mhm,
actual doctor,
mhm.
you know. And the point that she started to fall for him was that he had to not only save her, but save the world. And she helped him with that. But his vulnerability made it so that she was attracted to him and he attracted to her. Because it's like us.
Mhm.
The older you get, the lower the age of you being attracted. No, I'm not attracted. No.
Well, yeah, I mean, he got to figure he's 1,000 years old, so everyone's a kid, really.
Yeah, so it has to be certain things to be vulnerable or to strike that moment. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. So overall, we liked the new Who. Ncuti Gatwa, I think, did a remarkable job. He's got a lot on his shoulders, because he does have to represent all of the Who fans, plus push it a little bit into the future, leave his mark on the character, and yeah, it sucks being Jackie Robinson.
Well, actually, I was thinking, maybe the next one needs to be Asian.
Yeah, it could be. Well, it should be a free for all. It really should be a free for all, and and he can be anything, and if it serves the story, cool. If it doesn't serve the story, you know. But so that's our new Doctor Who review that came right at you. Ladies and gentlemen, definitely send your thoughts, your opinions to us. Drakestorm at Gmail for Terrence, correct?
Yes, sir.
You can hit me at thatsoquantum@gmail.com. Or you can hit me at urbandharma8 at gmail.com. The Urban Dharma with the number 8 at gmail.com. And like we like to sign off, don't be a stranger.
Just be strange.
Yep. And we will see you on the morrow. Have a safe and happy new year. And we will see you soon.
Next year.
Next year. Ha.